So we'll start with Lisa, if you want to introduce yourself real quick to our new friends.
Hi, friends. I'm Lisa Hickey. I started a company recently called Panacea Collection, and we rent beautiful furniture like this to events all over town. But prior to starting my own business, I worked for C3 Presents, which is the third largest concert promoter in the U.S., started from the very beginning, worked there for 14 years. I was the marketing director for our festivals, helped create the festival brands Austin City Limits Music Festival and Lollapalooza. And then after a few years of doing that, needed to start another startup and grind it out for a few more years. So that's my background, and yeah, so very excited to be here.
Here you go, buddy. I'll take this one. My name is Cody Cowan. I'm the general manager of the Mohawk, which is a live music venue on Red River. Also president of the Red River Merchants Association, native of Austin. Grew up playing in punk bands and then cleaning bathrooms at emos. And then 20 years later, here I am. Thank you.
Have you ever been in the convention center for South by?
I have never attended South by, and this is my first time in a convention center and to pick up anything from it.
And the venue's running itself right now? So
I've worked 21 years on the service side of it.
Well, thanks for breaking away from the venue. I know it's hard.
Yeah, I got doors open here, so I'll race down there afterwards.
Hey everybody, my name's Brendon Anthony. I'm about a 20-year Austin resident. Recovering musician, played music for many, many years, toured all over the place. Industry professional, worked in ticketing and e-commerce around Austin, and have been the director of the Texas Music Office in the Office of the Governor for about 3 years now. And we oversee, from the state's perspective, growth and support of the Texas music industry as a whole. And we're based here in Austin at the Capitol, and we work with folks like Lisa and Cody all the time to try to figure out how to better do our jobs and to how to better engage and to share those best practices with cities around the state who we think can benefit. So honored to be here today. Thanks so much for inviting us to be a part of the panel.
Cool. Thank you, guys. So this is my 14th South by Southwest. So I've watched Austin change very dramatically over the past 14 years. In particular, everything the other side of Congress is, pretty much all brand new. And, I'm from California. I live in Sacramento, California. And much of what Austin's been going through over the last, 8 or 10 years is starting to happen in my market. And you're starting to see, a lot of the travels that I've done of meeting other venue owners in other cities, seeing a very similar dynamic playing out with people moving into the core, becoming a big initiative of the city to get people to move into the core of the city. So I thought what was very interesting about what I've seen you guys do here in Austin, which would be hopefully beneficial to other people to hear, is kind of how you've gotten to where you are. Now you have a music office. There's a ton of nonprofits in town for musicians and healthcare. And then obviously, the Red River Cultural District and what you guys are doing. So Cody, you want to walk through a little bit of the history of how the Red River Cultural District and the Red River Merchants Association kind of came to be?
Yeah, so the Red River Cultural District and Merchants Association is kind of like an end result of the history of music in Austin since the 40s or 50s. I mean, there's been music down in Red River and on 6th Street for generations of folks. When I started emos in the late 90s, which is on 6th and Red River, it was just abandoned warehouses and dilapidated buildings going north on Red River. And then year after year, venues started popping up, and this walkability of a plethora of venues has grown from like 2 or 3 to 13 now. And then the sort of changing landscape of what was once a 100-year floodplain off of Waller Creek. No one wanted the properties down there, which is prime real estate for venues historically. We like cheap properties, low overhead. Those conditions have changed. Austin has grown, and now we're facing these sort of growth challenges where we're trying to make a business model that has like 95% cost model work in a place that our rents are like doubling every 5 to 10 years.
Are you finding that the price of beers are doubling and you can double the tickets to go along with it? Or
I'm finding that people want free shows and $1 Lone Stars. Yeah, there's always a threshold there.
And Lisa, you were involved a few years back with a study that was put together. How did that sort of come together?
Well, I think, and the reason why this panel topic is so timely and important in our city, we're a thriving city. Austin is very, very fast-growing city. I think a lot of people are moving here. We have a great tech scene. We have a great creative industry. We've got the film scene, our music industry. We've marketed the city on the live music capital of the world. And a lot of companies have put their headquarters here because of the culture of Austin. All the artists, the live music, everywhere you go, the airport, you know, pretty much everywhere you go, there's live music. And so music's really helped build the city and where we are now. We have almost 2 million residents, if you count the MSAs. And I think we're the 11th largest city in the U.S. Our music industry brings in about $1.8 billion in economic impact a year. That was kind of the last stat that was measured back in 2016, I believe. So, you know, we have a lot of great things going for us. It's a thriving and growing time, but also with that comes a lot of challenges. As Cody mentioned, affordability is a huge one, with venues having to move out of the central business district because they can no longer afford rents. Musician pay is kind of stagnant, not really going up. So affordability for musicians has become a huge issue. Most musicians make less than $18,000 a year. So a lot of our musicians are leaving Austin, going to cities outside of Austin. So a lot of leaders in the music industry organized together with the Austin Music Office to commission a census to really measure what our industry looks like, who's in it, how many jobs do we have, what are the different sectors and subsectors, how many employees do these companies have, and kind of what are the biggest challenges that we're facing. So we got a lot of really great data out of that, and we are working towards finding some solutions, but it was a great way to start this conversation about, okay, this is what we're facing, where do we want to go in the next 5, 10, 20 years to, you know, maintain that culture that's so important, not only culture of our city, but also it's a huge revenue generator.
So, I mean, to that point, Brendon, you're not just Austin. You're doing this job across Texas in lots of different markets. Obviously, Austin has a very vibrant and has had a very vibrant music. It's the music capital. How have you been able to take those learnings and how do you sort of start to apply that outside of Austin and into other markets? You know, obviously they're different. They all have their own challenges. But have you found that that's been something you've been able to replicate? And I guess to Lisa's point, how does this data play into making that, you know, to getting cities that aren't necessarily recognizing it as a value to the city? How do you get them to start taking it seriously and seeing it as a part of the community?
Yeah, it's a big question, and it's one we spend quite a bit of time on at the office. Austin is experiencing its share of difficulty right now. Growth has a tendency to manage a city versus a city being able to manage the growth, and that's a constant push-pull that we have to work really hard to stay ahead of. But I think all the time, you know, where would this city be if we didn't have the systems in place that folks have worked so hard to build, right? Austin is blessed with a vibrant music scene, yes, but there's a safety net in place for those people here in the form of Health Alliance for Austin Musicians and the Sims Foundation. There's an education component in Austin Music Foundation. There's a patronage organization in Black Fret, and on and on and on. And there are private citizens who are willing to engage at a very, very high level to move the industry forward, support it, and understand it. And there are city systems built that can actually hear the needs of the community and translate those to city leadership. So the signal-to-noise ratio, if you will, is where it ought to be, right? So the community, there's an outcry in the community. There's data that says the community needs help. But what's great is there's the data, and there are people that can hear it and interpret it to city leadership so that they can get on the ball and do things like we hear our mayors say. You know, we've got to fix these problems. We'll keep them front and center. Music is very important here. We want it to stick around. Dallas doesn't have that system, and Houston doesn't have that system, and San Antonio doesn't have that system, and Denton doesn't have that system, and Lubbock doesn't have that system, and on and on and on, and that's my purview, right? Today, we're in the process of building those systems in those different places. We've certified Denton as a music-friendly community, which means they've installed a music officer and liaison. They've signed an MOU with our office to sample their data and share it with us so we can do our job representing them better. They've created real affiliation with nonprofit boards that absorb the needs of the community and translate those to the music liaison and up the chain so that the community is heard and understood. And they sample that community so that they understand truly the economic impact of that group so that they can address it like they address the needs of any other economic vertical in their city, which is absolutely vital. So we learn lessons in Austin, we deal with challenges in Austin, but we have systems in place, thankfully, that can help us to deal with those issues. And we want other cities to have that same shot. Many, many cities and communities in this state contribute to our overall economic landscape on the music community side, and we have to make sure that those folks in those cities have the same opportunities eventually. And this is a new initiative we've been working on. It's one we're really proud of, and we hope that it's going to net dividends down the line, and as growth continues to happen, the same way it's happening here in other cities, those problems are going to crop up, and they've got to be able to manage them.
So I think, so Cody, you know, if I'm a venue owner in Sacramento, California, where I live, and I'm feeling the pressure of, you know, this dark corner of town where I've built my venue and we've been running for 10 years, now has restaurants and nightlife and neighbors complaining that have moved in about noise. How do you start this conversation? Are there, like, what's step one for like starting to do something about it? Is it do I just go on Facebook and I just complain about all of the gentrification and the Whole Foods, or do I, you know, who do I engage with in the city? Like, how do I start that conversation?
Yeah, I found the first step was really reaching out to a lot of the friends and neighbors that we had on Red River. I mean, we've had a good group of people down there who have run venues for 10 plus years, a lot of people working in the industry 15, 20 years. But the strange thing has been we're just all in our little bubbles, working 7 days a week, never getting out, and maybe even considering the person next door to us as like competition, because in a sense they are, especially if they have a similar capacity venue. But getting together with folks, sharing our concerns, and then moving past that point that you made where it's like, you know, let's just shake our fist at the sky and hope things will change and just be kind of like a petulant child about it. You go, this is a business. We have staff that are depending upon us for jobs. We have our families depending upon us for jobs, and you know, we don't have pensions or even health insurance for the most part. So let's take care of business, get things done, and come together as a collection of people that can give a voice to music and speak as advocates, right? It's like, instead of being a topic of the conversation, let's drive the conversation. And that was the first step before we even intersected with other private businesses or government that we found we needed to get through.
And Lisa, how do you view that? Do you view sort of the same, you know, you've been involved in the city here for a long time, and then you guys have also worked and seen what's going on in Canada. Do you sort of view like that, like any sort of steps that people can take to start that conversation from your perspective?
Yeah, and we were talking before we came out here just about the importance of an economic impact study. And I know, Brendon, you're saying that's one of the things you sort of help drive with the music certified cities throughout the state. But until you can quantify and say, hey guys, we make $2 billion a year for our city and X amount in tax revenue, we're important, listen to what we have to say, or let's have that budget conversation to get support for X and Y and Z initiatives. I think that was a big first step for Austin, to be able to put that on paper and say, these are our stats, this is what our industry brings to the table, and this is why it's important.
Which I guess to be okay, I was going to say.
Well, I was just going to add, you know, that is an essential part of creating a meaningful dialogue with elected leadership and folks who are in a position to actually help you shape laws, shape ordinances, shape common sense law enforcement. The list goes on and on and on. If they are, like we said earlier, if they can look at your industry side by side with every other economic driver of their city, they're going to respect that you make an impact. They're going to respect that they need to support you and listen to you. And resetting that conversation, so that they understand that, yes, music and the industry professionals that contribute to the economy are huge contributors to the cultural side of our cities that we love, but they're also, on the other side of that coin, very, very important to the bottom line of the city. And understanding them via economic impact studies that accurately measure their contributions is bedrock to starting that conversation.
Yeah, and I'd say it wasn't until we started talking about math rather than emotion that people started to take us seriously. Like when you're trying to convince people how cool it is or how vital it is for the history of the city or for people or for yourself, if you bring your passion to it, it's just going to fall on deaf ears. You really need to have it a data-driven conversation that looks at overhead, that looks at cost, that looks at sales. In the terms of an outdoor music venue like Mohawk, we have permitting for decibels, for times for cutoff, all the things that create a run a show for us. So you have to bring this sort of business of rock and roll to the table and leave rock and roll for the artists. And I think that has been one of the real evolutionary steps that I've seen many of my peers take when they stop thinking about themselves as part of the rock and roll and part of the party and, being responsible stakeholders in the conversation.
And I think when we were speaking prior to the panel just about how do you even pay for something like that, there are tens of thousands of dollars. And when you first asked me that, I was like, I don't know. But I think that there are, if you're sort of experiencing something similar in the market where you live, or you're looking to organize, or you need to have the data measured, you can go to a local university. Maybe they have a department that does this sort of thing. We did that in Chicago when we were trying to measure the economic impact of Lollapalooza the first couple of years. You can also go to the tourism bureaus. You were mentioning that's a great resource, or the chamber.
Yeah, chambers and Visit Insert City here have funds for measurement that they could be using for things like that. That's absolutely true. And you make a great point about the universities. We had St. Ed's here in town created a tremendous study of our analysis of our social media, reach out and our data that we had in the office, and they did it as a capstone program, and it was fantastic. So yeah, there's solutions out there for certain.
Kickstarter.
Pledge music for economic development. Yeah, absolutely.
I think another piece to that, like maybe a next step, is to realize that everyone, not everyone, but many people are profoundly affected by music. So whether you're wearing a suit or whether you're wearing a leather jacket, you have people that have sort of tracked the chart of their life by different albums they're listening to, by different songs. They've fallen in love, and they've fallen out of love with music. Music, for those of us in music, it really defines who we are, and it's a language to us. And those people work in venues, but they also work in policy. So finding folks on the city level or the state level who are also avid music lovers to also be advocates for you is vital. I mean, all of the gains that I've seen made politically for the past 5 years, including the adoption of the Cultural District in 2013, to creating a merchants association, to implementing policy changes like getting additional hours, which means additional revenue. These would not have happened if I didn't have friends at the state or friends, in the music office or in economic development in the city who are willing to help me navigate the process of the chain of command, because from the outside perspective, like, city and government process just seems like this big gobbledygook, and it's frustrating, and it's not really customer service driven, right? There's a very big disconnect between private and public sector. So finding someone who helps you understand, oh, that's the head of this department, and actually there's this election cycle going on, so you might want to be careful about how you talk to so-and-so. But once these things start cooking and you got people who can give you the inside track, and never mind council or mayor support, like music really is fortunate to have here in Austin, you have to start at the bottom there and understand how to navigate that route, and just take your time with it. It's still, even after being engaged in this, having been working in this for decades, but only having been really engaged in it in 5 years, I can tell you, like, it's still so obtuse. Like, department heads change, politics change internally, and it's like, meanwhile, you're working like 60-hour weeks, 7 days a week, just trying to like run your business, and then you got this full part-time job playing politics and just trying to keep an ecosystem alive that enables your business to have the advantage that it needs for you to have a job 10 years from now, you know?
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things I've always loved about Mohawk, the first couple of years I came here, there was the Beverly was not there, the apartments across the street. There were no hotels surrounding it. And when they built the Beverly, you guys actually engaged with the developers, and you had an impact on the design of the building, correct?
Yeah. To Greg's first point about shouting at the sky and playing like complainer on Twitter or something, it's like one of the first narratives that we found we had to change his music was this us versus them, like the developers in town, boo, they want to ruin the party, like they don't understand where we're coming from, man. It's like, nah, dude, like no one cares about that. And plus it's all a red herring. The developers are moving to your neighborhood because you have rad art and culture there, and they're going to bring dollars and they're going to support cultural tourism. Like, okay, that means you can activate daytime hours or other events outside of music in your space. That helps you pay rent. So we made a really concerted effort to change that attitude, to welcome people in who we found were a fit to our community, especially as we defined it as merchants and as a collective. And then when hotels started coming in, one of the real big tensions here in Austin, which is something that's really unique to the city, is this outdoor live music and festival thing, right? I mean, I've traveled around, I'm sure you're all from different places, but it's really not that common. Why? Because neighborhoods hate it, right? It's like, it's really annoying to hear a thrumming bass down the street from you at like midnight for just about anyone. And like similarly, as I'm sure many of you are experiencing today regarding where you're staying, it's like, oh, it's like 2 a.m., I wish I could go to bed, right? So there are ways of mitigating sound in buildings. There's building codes, there's materials, there's double, triple pane windows. Take one of the hotels down on Red River, pointing your vents at venues for your ventilation systems. Also, it was an important thing that they should have considered. Apparently, sound travels through vents. So, but then you run into like facts of these other business models where you have developers coming in and their only plan is to build something as cheaply, as quickly as possible, to then get return of investment on that 5-10 years afterwards and flip it. So it's really, they might say, cool, we love you, want to be here. South by South comes around, we're going to triple those prices, and it's going to be a great time. Thanks, music venues, for being there. But then, they don't build the code or the standard, and then many of y'all are like, yelping about it at us. So that's a bummer.
So to play devil's advocate, though, Lisa, like, why does this matter? Like, I mean, I think the counter argument would be, this is just market dynamics, right? That, real estate goes up. Are we going to start subsidizing donut shops, or just because somebody happened to be in the neighborhood? What's the downside of not taking care of this?
That's a hard question.
We can toss it to him too.
No, I mean, I think
the government.
One of the biggest things it comes down to is that's why a lot of people live here. That's why a lot of companies moved here. We have a great talent pool here. Smart, creative people, cool people move to Austin because of the culture of the city and the live music, the music industry. So beyond just what our industry produces in revenue, it's recruiting a lot of other big headquarters to come to Austin, and they're using that as a little carrot to get them to build their headquarters here and build those businesses here in Austin. So I think just on that big picture, that's one reason why it's important. It's who we are, the culture of our city, music, and if we don't take care of that and protect that, who are we? Who are we?
That's really it in a nutshell. I mean, Austin uses music to create more and more and more and more opportunities that Austin would never have without the other. And we here and we in different communities around the state have to make that intentional choice to say, well, who are we here? Do we care about this? Yeah, there's the economic impact side that we all agree is very, very important. But on some level, too, like, what are we as a culture, too? Is this something that, if we don't make intentional decisions about, market forces will go to work, and then you'll have a whole bunch of hotels and shells, And that will happen, if we don't have that conversation, stick our heads up every now and then and say, Why do we care about this? You know, why is this important to us? Because having a well-rounded society is a very important societal goal. We should all hold very dear. You know, the live music, the creators who live in the city are extremely important to its past and its future. And you know, we have to ask those questions like, is this important? Yeah. What are we going to do about it? 100%.
I mean, we could get again back into the concept of arts and humanities and the importance of these things and all these hypotheticals, and have no one agree. But the facts are rather that, you know, if you take Red River as a case study, it was a bunch of abandoned warehouses, and you go back far enough, you know, whorehouses and stables. But once you have this economy growing and thriving, where's the affordability? The history of venues worldwide at any decade was dependent upon there being some space that people can move in, throw up a PA, slap something together and call it a bar, and then charge a cover at the door, right? And if you look at Austin, where's that space going to be? It's not downtown. It's not, I mean, many of you probably are from Austin, but having grown up here, you can just look around the boundaries of the city and growth is everywhere. There's like, something like 15 cranes in the sky right now. So if venues go away, they're not replaceable. And we've seen this in places like, you know, I was part of a ULI study, a Urban Land Institute study, which...
We hung out.
Yeah, we hung out. We chatted in that.
That sounds like a rager.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's exciting, yeah. But that was really helpful, you know, because we had resources to talk to folks in Sydney, to talk to folks in London, New York, San Francisco, so on and so forth. And London has had a really rough go of it, like the past 5 years. There are different math that's been applied to it, but something like in the past 3 years, 60 to 70% of music venues have closed in London. So, and this is the same economics.
And New York's had a similar problem.
Yeah.
And both cities have now created nightmares.
So this is like tip of the spear stuff. San Francisco is having this problem. Sydney is having this problem.
Nightmares. We have to be very clear about that.
Not nightmares.
Everybody thought I was saying nightmares.
Nightmare. If you're looking for a job, the nightmare is the job you want. Right. Your job is to stay out all night and make sure everything's cool.
Right.
Amsterdam, London, New York.
Yeah.
These are jobs, folks.
So we are discovering that, you know, the math of it is that we have a preservation responsibility, right? Because while some of these things happened organically, almost uniformly without any thought by venue people over decades, whether it was like CBGBs or whatever, it was just like accidental success. Let me tell you, there aren't a lot of like high school degrees or college diplomas for people working in the music industry, at least on the street level. And that doesn't matter because the whole thing is an apprenticeship. But, you know, if we don't preserve the spaces and the ability to replicate those spaces, then it will go away. It's just the math of it.
I think you hit a really, you know, huge point that we talked about, you know, backstage. I love saying backstage. But yeah, I think that idea of I don't know, of all the people I know who are successful in the music industry, almost none of them have college degrees. Almost all of them started as a very entry level. You waxed poetic about cleaning the bathrooms at Emos as your sort of entry-level job. My entry-level job was putting ice in buses, you know, like on tour and tuning guitars. So I think that how can we create that role? Because I think that if you lose these, especially with consolidation too, as you have the bigger entities, we won't name them, but they're buying up rooms, they're buying up promoters, they're consolidating the markets. Is this opportunity for tomorrow's generation of venue owners and producers and tour managers and musicians of having, you know, a door to open for them to come in and clean the bathrooms? I still don't believe in that anybody ever cleaned the bathrooms at Emos. Like, I don't. He says it happened. I'm not exactly sure it happened.
We were famous right around the CBGB's level of horrible bathrooms.
And that was clean. That's when they were clean.
Yeah, that was after they were clean. You don't want to know. I won't even talk about
it. Let me, if you don't mind, let me answer part of that question because I think it's an interesting conversation. Comes up all the time. You know, we've in Texas got some great universities and colleges that train folks in performance, right? Like you can go to a university and get an incredible performance degree and leave the university or college vastly unprepared for a career in the music industry, right? You may be one of 10,000 sax players that nobody can touch, but how many of those folks are going to get the opportunity to create a full-scale living out of doing that? That number starts to decrease. So, the conversation I have with colleges and universities around the state, there's some great examples of folks who have created innovative programs, partnerships with institutions outside our state as well. It's like you've got to start thinking about preparing a workforce here, a little bit more. Classes in entrepreneurship or even trades in the music industry, and some are doing a good job of that, but not enough, I don't think.
Yeah, when we were backstage, I was sharing the program that the UC Theater does in Berkeley, where they have kids from the community who are at risk, and they come in and they do production jobs, and it's like a little apprenticeship program. And a few of the people that work now in the venue full-time came through that program. Do you see that as a viable path to unlock actually additional revenue from the city? I mean, there are budgets for these types of programs.
100%. I mean, because what we're talking about at the end of the day there is workforce development. And if we're not investing in that, we're not investing in the future. We've got all these numbers that we have in our economic impact study. And if we want to see those continue to trend upwards, we're going to have to keep training a workforce and not letting them figure out on, as much on their own. We can take a more active role in that. We have to work, with cities and communities and colleges and universities and folks who are adept at running trade-type organizations to do that. But yeah, I mean, that's getting serious about workforce development, and that should be an industry standard thing.
Sounds like you want to organize in Texas.
Want to organize. I think I want to kind of help spread the word that this is something we ought to be considering. I don't have the resources from the Texas Music Office to be that organizer of that statewide program. But I think it can start at a grassroots level in all these different communities. And that ought to be part of the best practice we talk about in music-friendly communities is, okay, create clear lines of communication, understand your industry, support your industry, train your workforce,
I think he put that back on you, Cody. I think you're the grassroots level he's talking about.
So, yeah, just to the point of growing the workforce and where we all started, you don't really learn the music business through taking classes. You learn it through experience, and it takes a certain type of personality, kind of like that entrepreneur startup. It's a lot of hard work. You start from the ground, you work your way up. So we do have a lot of small music businesses in Austin, 5 people or less. So we've got a lot of people running their own small music business. Many of them have been in business 5 years or less. And I think one other thing that would be great for our city as another next step, there's some conversation going on around a hub or an accelerator or even a VC fund that can help music businesses get started and get kicked off the ground. I think that's kind of another next critical step for our music industry.
Yeah, and that takes a lot of private buy-in, right? Because the city can't do all that heavy lifting. And so this is just a best practice statement, I think, finding your engaged advocates on the private side is key to supporting those communities. Finding the people who are going to be your warriors on the private side, and not just throwing benefit concerts, which are great, but actually getting involved in developing these nonprofits and businesses that are going to drive your community forward. We've got some great examples here. They're private folks, so I won't call them out on a video deal, but we've got some great examples here of people who are using their expertise as brilliant business people, using their funds that they've worked very hard to accrue, and they could be on a boat somewhere if they wanted to, but this is important to them. They answered that question, why do we care, in a really definitive way, and are doing it every day. And those people can help drive the ship on acceleration, hub, space, that sort of thing. And those people understand that while the normal VC model is to expect a return, as we were saying earlier, I'm going to give you $1 million, I want 10 back. That's our deal. Investing in the music industry is, what is that? What does that really mean? On the record side, it's a crapshoot. On the publishing side, not guaranteed, but usually 5 to 7% annuity type thing. It's not the normal kind of investment. This is an investment in seeding a community and creating a workforce. And that's pretty incredible that those folks are willing to engage.
So, I mean, you have the challenge. You go to markets who, for all intents and purposes, I guess, I'm going to assume that some of these markets that you go into, city council doesn't care, mayor doesn't care, nobody cares. and you're coming into town and saying, hey guys, I got these great ideas from Austin, let's talk about them. How do you, I mean, we've talked a lot about from the venue side, like how do we start that conversation, but within the halls of the municipalities and the government, like how are you starting that conversation and bringing people over to make them sort of understand that this is important to their community?
Yeah, thanks for that question, because it is one I struggle with all the time. I mentioned earlier that we'd certified Fort Worth, Denton, Austin, and San Antonio, right? Now, Austin was, well on the way with very little help from me to get any of this going. I'll absolutely grant you that. And first of all, I don't go into those cities and say, hey guys, look what Austin's doing. I'll work that into the conversation as you should consider, if the first part of the conversation goes well, I'll say, also, you should consider nonprofit support for health and mental services and those sort of things. The conversation usually works like this. I'll sit down with the head of a Convention and Visitors Bureau or a city council person who could be an advocate, or someone from the mayor's office or their economic development office, and I'll say, with data that I'm carrying with me from my office, I will say, do you know that there are 10,000 industry professionals who live and work in your city? The answer is no. They know we have a thing. They know we have a music thing. Okay, did you know that these people are facing what could be considered crises to them every day? These people are in conversations with law enforcement every day. These people are being taxed in a way they don't necessarily understand every day. How are you listening to those folks? And the answer is normally we don't listen to that group as a whole. Oh, I know John, he runs the venue down there. He tells me what's up, that kind of thing. And we just evolved that conversation into, wouldn't you like to understand this vertical better? Wouldn't you like to know how to brand your city better? Sure, not to use the music industry community, but to understand it better, to tell a more overall, holistic story of what your city does when you go out and sell yourself to the rest of the world. And wouldn't you like to keep it that way or improve it, And the answer, unless they're irresponsible managers, is, okay, we really need to think about this, okay? And then the next conversation is, you should really think about creating an office that is going to funnel that information to you. In fact, on our music-friendly certification checklist, you have to do that. You're not going to get certified otherwise. You have to hold that workshop. You've got to create that office. And we just evolved the conversation from there. It is a real exercise to just get them thinking about the industry in a new way. That's really it.
That's awesome. And you touched on some of the one thing that I think is really interesting about Austin too, which is the nonprofit side. Do you want to walk through it's always kind of blows my mind like how much help there is here on the nonprofit side that doesn't really exist in other markets?
Help me out if anyone in this room knows the stat, but do we know how many music-related nonprofits are in Austin?
150. Nick, surely how many?
Nick? 142 music-related nonprofits supporting our industry. That's a lot. That's incredible. There's so many, and they do so many different things. I'm personally on the board of the Health Alliance for Austin Musicians. I've served on that board, I think, since almost 10 years. And that's a cause that I'm passionate about. I realize that a lot of working musicians aren't rolling, living the MTV. Well, there's no really MTV anymore, but living the lifestyle.
Nobody's living the MTV
in the music videos. In fact, many of them, as I mentioned before, are making less than $20,000 a year, and going to the doctor is not something you would ever spend your money on. So the Health Alliance for Austin Musicians works with providing access to affordable health care for our working musicians, and that's connecting them with service providers, whether that's hearing, visual services, also helping them find insurance plans now that the healthcare landscape is changing a lot, so finding access to affordable insurance plans, and also helping them navigate the healthcare system, which is a new thing that the organization has evolved into. It's so complex, and I think it's intimidating it's intimidating to me, and so I think that is something very helpful to the musicians. It's like, what is that next step? What do I do with my health care? What if I'm facing a devastating illness? What are the resources available to me with specialty care? And so, anyway, I'm very passionate about HAM. I think it's a great organization, and I think that's one important thing. And I think a lot of musicians would say that's probably one of the reasons they still live here in Austin and haven't left the city yet, is a service such as that. We have also the Austin Music Foundation, which focuses on like mentorship and education for musicians and music businesses. And All ATX has just recently launched a leadership music program, just kind of bringing together some leaders from different sectors of the music industry in Austin to learn more about what each other does. I think that was modeled after leadership music in Nashville. And so we're excited about that program. But, you know, that was 3. There's almost 150.
So you have 140 something left to go. We're all.
Let me get out my list. I brought all my papers up here.
It strikes me is that unprecedented, that level of, is this happening anywhere else in the country where there's that level of nonprofit that you know of?
Not that I know of. In Nashville, through the Grammy chapter, has Music Cares, which is fantastic. And they try to be a nationwide organization. But I don't think that taken as a whole, I think the nonprofit environment here is unparalleled.
How does that happen? I mean, I think that's an interesting thing to me. You know, when we did, Fun, we would always do donations. Part of like some of the stuff we do for ticketing would be donations to Ham. And it just kind of like blew my mind that these things existed. Like, how do these things get off the ground? Like, obviously this isn't overnight. We're looking at the very tail end of a lot of efforts. But how do these organizations start?
Well, we have this conversation with other cities when they come to us and they say, we're very excited about this Music Friendly Communities program, possibly, and they say, and we want to do Ham, and we want to do Sims, and we want to do education, and we want to do patronage, and we don't have a magic wand to do those things. Ham is run by Renee Collins, who is a healthcare professional. That is her job, is to navigate that huge program they built with corporate dollars and just a system that's taken years and years and years to build. It absolutely does not happen overnight, and it takes real talent to help get it off the ground and real support. Sims is the same way, and AMF has been around for years and years because, people have contributed to it. Talented people have contributed to it, and I think it takes that. I think it takes, real talent, private partnership, folks who understand how to build those systems, and people who are serious about getting those things off the ground.
So this has been a little bit of, I don't want to have the tone be this victory lap that Austin's figured it all out and, all the work is done. When you look down the road, like what are the, Cody, I guess, start with you, like what are the challenges that that are keeping you up or that weigh on you right now that you're really trying to think about, like the next bridge to cross or the next, if the bridge or not?
Yeah, when I started working in the industry when I was 19, I don't think I could tell you what I wanted 3 days from now or what happened 3 days ago. But, at 40 now, it's like, what's the 5-year plan? What's the 10-year plan? What's a 20-year plan? And unfortunately, even with the moves that we're making and the sort of forethought we're trying to put into this, these economic pressures are going to continue to be a challenge. 5 to 10 years from now, the landscape of downtown, for instance, on Red River, where you're going to walk out from the convention center, that's Red River, is changing so rapidly that a lot of the larger businesses alliances are looking at it and going, well, we'll take meetings with y'all, but we don't see you being here in the next 5 to 10 years.
Do you get a line of sight into the development roadmap? Because obviously these projects take, the Indigo or something takes years of planning before they break ground on something like that. Are you in the conversation with the city, like what's coming? You don't have to, if you do know, you don't have to tell us, but.
Sometimes, sometimes not though. Often we're finding out when they're finding out, which is when it's starting to happen. When the developers are approaching city staff for like permitting and stuff like that. But one of the biggest challenges is that none of the venues own their property, right? One does, Stubbs, of 13. So not only we're being challenged with paying rents, rising costs. You can only charge a beer so much. Like I should be charging people $8 for a Lone Star. Can you imagine? That's a joke. That's insane.
If any of us are from California, that's not that bad actually.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But it's like, it's the consumer threshold here, and people are just like, nope, So with that, you have landlords that are charging accelerators on rents during South by Southwest. So many people are paying double rent during South by Southwest.
Really?
Yeah. And since that's not awesome, but, you know, which, you know, to give a perspective, South by Southwest can contribute anywhere between, I don't know, 15% to 60% of annual revenues for venues. This is how vital the music festival and also the interactive and other portions of the festival are to driving the business plan for venues. So we don't own the land. There are capital view corridor restrictions to development to some of our spaces. But at the end of the day, once the right number is hit for the landlords, they're going to consider offers. And many of these landlords are already 60, 70, 80, 90 years old. And there isn't really a next step in place that gives us any confidence about our ability either to A, buy out the property or even be part of that conversation. So, you know, that's frustrating stuff, but it's sort of like future tripping stuff that you're like, well, I can't really do anything about that. I can get organized. I can start being more forward-thinking in our business plan. We can get together and develop daytime hours and work at programs to reduce crime, increase safety, increase infrastructure in our neighborhoods. And, you know, that was kind of the problem to the beginning of the conversation. It was like, the man's bringing us down. We got to stop all this growth, man, you know. And it's like, well, it's happened. It's time to move forward. But the venues were like, well, if we keep the neighborhood shitty enough, then no one will want to be down here, you know? It was like, yeah, I don't think so. They're investing like $200 million in developing Waller Creek, largest public works project in the history of Texas, I've been told. So, you know, it was changing that mentality and just getting on board. Like, you know, cleaning up the neighborhoods and getting more traffic and cultural tourism in the district is like going to help us on the bottom line and keep our ability and maintain our ability to address these sort of future threats. But in the meantime, it's just, you just got to keep fighting, you know? And again, we have intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. Money is important, but money is not driving the motivations of anyone that I've met in the music industry. It's just not a real thing. Like, I haven't met a single person who's like, yeah, I decided to start mopping the floor at the club because I was going to get rich, you know? It's like, that wasn't my motivation. That wasn't any of the peers that I've met. It is important, though, because, you know, I split a duplex with my cousin in 2003 here, and my share of the rent was $150. $150. I just moved back from San Francisco, where I was sharing a space probably smaller than the room I was renting with my cousin, which was like $1,500, which I know a lot of you will scoff at if any of you know about prices in San Francisco now. That was in the Mission. So, you know, they're those extrinsic motivations, but you really have to keep yourself centered on your core. Why are you here? Why are you doing this? What is your key value, your core value here? What is that intrinsic motivation? And I've found that, you know, by and far, the peers that I've met are just like the scrappiest, most motivated, stubborn, willful DIY people that you can find walking the face of the planet, and the most creative. Like, we figured out how to do everything without money and with like zip ties and duct tape for like our entire careers. And, you know, so if you're in it, any of y'all out there are in it, and you're feeling down about that, like, don't. This is how it's done. It's done with grit, it's done with sweat, it's done with blood, but it's done with love. Like, that is what's going to keep it going, because that is never going to change.
And zip ties. All those things.
And zip ties. Yeah. Invest in zip ties.
I want to, like, we have about a little over 10 minutes left. I want to open up to questions if anybody has questions, or we can just kind of keep talking. Sure. Do we have a microphone to go out into?
That's cool.
Sorry, I just did that. Okay.
That's great. That's
great. Sure. I just employed Brendon to be our...
Hi, guys.
Sure.
So you mentioned earlier about the state not having resources to develop these different maybe work programs, and that also venture capitalists are not really very interested in funding music. And growing up in Austin, I've noticed they're very, very interested in funding, you know, their tech and restaurants and the bars where all the musicians work, but not the actual music itself. And I was wondering if you guys had maybe a thought of why, because it is all done with love, and people with a lot of money also love music, but they're not putting it towards music.
That's a good question. I'll take the first part because you were asking about state resources. What I meant, just to clarify, what I meant was that my office, the Texas Music Office, does not have a program that offers workforce development, right? The state could likely, with support from, you know, a majority of voters, create something like that, I think. That's all theoretical. Again, you know, I'll reiterate something I said about the tech side too, is that, you know, I don't know if the conventional, I'm thinking, I don't know if the conventional VC understands how to invest in the music business, right? You were talking about buying a club. Okay, I could see that because you're buying real estate. You're buying a going concern that you could see some turnover on, but that's not a home run investment necessarily, and you know, unless it's a real estate play. Yeah. Again, like publishing's a pretty low turnout rate. Like buying a record label as a VC guy doesn't make much sense either. You know, because unless you have institutional knowledge of how major labels work, you know, those don't stay in business traditionally unless you're a Power 6. It's just not a space that I see a lot of VC guys gravitating towards. Now, there's tech that gets invented in the music space all the time, but that's still sort of classified as tech, right? So maybe I wasn't being clear. I think maybe folks would if there was some really big determinable ROI they could see.
I'd like to believe that maybe we could get more investors in music businesses if there was more mentorship or coaching for small entrepreneurs. As we mentioned, a lot of people go into the music business. They start from the ground up. They dropped out of college. I dropped out of college. And, you know, having somebody coaching you on your business, in order to get money, you have to have a business plan and you have to be able to do the forecasting and all of that. I think a lot of people go into the music business probably have no idea about. So I think if we were able to create some structure around helping our entrepreneurs, maybe we could see some more investors.
Well, that's a key part too. The one thing you probably do pick up from business school is mentorship programs. And like by going to college and going to business school, it's a huge part of running startups. You know, when I started businesses, getting advisors or groups of other business owners to talk about trials and tribulations, I don't think that the music industry, and particularly the live side, necessarily has that infrastructure, understands that you cross-sharing information is really strong and beneficial, and then within the city as well, other businesses that aren't music can teach you a lot about how to navigate and raise money. But you're right. I mean, if you can't do a multiplier on the revenue they've invested, it's really hard to get investment. You know, that's the business, is give you money and exit, and success is lasting 30 years.
Yeah.
And I'm the director of music in New Orleans, and I think we have a lot of parallels. Don't have big publishing companies, don't have record labels, and we're really trying to figure out how to support musicians. Because as Lisa said, $20,000 a year, you can send bands to California and they sell out for 5 nights. Here they're playing for tips. We send bands to Amsterdam, they come back, people think the bar's paying them, bar's not paying them. And we haven't really figured out how culturally we can get people to really pay for live music, as opposed to just, you know, throwing spare change in a can. Just wondering if you guys had done anything with that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I was actually about to talk about that. So
I knew that.
Kismet, you know. I like to use this metaphor quite a bit. There's this idea of adaptive, transformative biology, right? This idea with plants that if you introduce a plant to a new space, that new environment, if it doesn't adapt to that environment, it kills it. And then some plants that start to thrive, you introduce it to that environment, it goes, okay, this is what's going on, I'm gonna be part of this, and it survives. But what we really want is the sort of evolutionary adaptation where the plant that comes in the environment, it gets what's going on, and then it takes it over. It just becomes a total nuisance, and it owns the environment and changes it to suit its needs. That's been the approach that I've used with these sort of pressures that you're talking about. I mean, in Austin, when I started working at Emos, or right before I started working in Emos, it was really common to have free covers at any space and have tip jars and these sort of things. And I remember when we first changed it to like $2 cover at the door, people like lost their minds. It was like a riot in the street of the music people. And then here we are 20 years later, and people are like, man, my peers and who are running venues are like, man, our customers won't pay more than $5 for a band. We're thinking about becoming free. And for those of us in the music industry who have touring support and you have ticketed shows, you can't just waffle between having free shows all the time and then like $35 shows. It's just like not something that really can make sense to guests and to patrons. But it also doesn't make sense to the economy of the environment. And it doesn't make sense that in 20 years there's only been like a $3 increase to prices where there's been like a 300 increase or 3,000% increase to like costs. Like that's insane. So my approach has been, and some people agree and some people disagree, which is you have to adapt the environment to suit your needs. And while that might create some friction with customers, the overwhelming attitude that I think we're all combating or trying to find an answer to is like this whole idea of free. Music's free. Art is free. No one wants to pay for anything. I'm entitled to it. You know, what's your problem, you know? And the thing is, no, nothing in life is for free. Advice is for free. That maybe that, but you know, that's not going to pay bills. So from a venue perspective, as someone who's an incubator venue where we have 2 stages, a smaller room of 150 cap, where you know you're going to be able to get your friends and family out and really start to grow from the ground up your music, and then you have like a 900 cap for the outside stage. You know, we're invested in musicians' growth and their development. We want to see them jump off and go down to Stubbs or ACL. So we got to be able to pay. To do that, we have to be open, and I have to be able to pay overhead. Part of that's the cover charge. Bands need to be able to get paid to do this too. So I don't know if it's the answer. I mean, we like raised our local covers to $10, which just same like with the Lone Star analogy. It really should be $15. But people won't pay it. And I tell you, even in-house with my staff, it was like, you're the boss, but you're crazy. If you want to tank things, you can talk to your boss about that, you know. And it was like, here we are a year later after making that change, and there's been the same or increase in local support. So it's like a lot of it is getting over to that fear of being the first one. But in music, what the great thing is like we're like lunatics at heart. So we love risk. All of the fun is in the risk. All of the passion's in the risk. You know, like do it. What do you have to lose? The same model isn't gonna fix it. And it what
we're even talking about having rules for tourists, like you know, the best way to get arrested in New Orleans is piss in the street.
Yeah.
So we tell them don't piss in the street. But the other thing is maybe you need to pay $10 a set. You know, put some guidelines around all the people that come in that aren't normally from there. They don't know. You know, they come in from Green Bay. Hell, they don't know what they're supposed to do down there.
Well, the great thing.
I'm sorry if anybody's from Green Bay.
The great thing is the proof is in the pudding. Yeah. And I mean, and markets are totally different. Like what works here and what's unique about here won't apply even in Fort Worth in the same state necessarily. If you buy talent, you know that absolutely true. So, but what do you got to lose? You know, if artists can't afford to pay or play, then what's going on? You know, just make a change and then listen to what the proof is. The math is the proof. Either no one's turning up, the sales are declining, et cetera, et cetera. You have metrics you can measure that by.
Another question?
Hi, I'm an event producer here in Austin. Hey, y'all. And I've heard a little bit of the discussion has been on the topic of economic displacement and the cost going up specifically for musicians, but we haven't really touched on racial displacement and how gentrification has kind of perpetuated the history of racism and segregation in Austin. And so I wanted to kind of ask what positive change the Austin music business can have to not let that be perpetuated and to better brand our city as a creative hub for other people to move to.
That's a real important topic to Austin. And actually from being part of the district, looking at history, I mean, I don't know, are you from Austin?
I'm from Texas. I've been
from Texas? Yeah, Austin has a long history with this sort of ethnic and racial disparity. Like, if you've been here for a minute, you see there's a West Austin, there's a Central Austin, there's an East Austin, and largely they've been represented by different groups of folks, and that wasn't accidentally. Red River itself was a primarily African-American owned business district before the 40s or 50s, I believe, and then they were forcibly displaced. So these sort of things happen not just because of like gentrification, but also because of policy. You know, I can advocate progressively with these things, but what my job really is what do I do at the venue? Austin also has an interesting history of music. It's like bizarrely been genre driven, right? You have the hip hop venue, you have the reggae venue, you have the metal venue. It's like there's been very little crossover. I mean, when I was coming up, it was just, I assumed that was the way it is, and then I traveled around. I was like, oh, that's weird. Most businesses are like, we want all business, you know, like that's sensible. But that's something that I have seen change in Austin, and I think becoming more aware of in talking to our peer groups, because this idea of genre diversity, I mean, that's kind of what we can do, is important. And trust, but at the same time, the challenges between what I'm hearing from peers is, what is the math? Like, am I making money on this type of show? Am I losing money? I'm making money on this type of show. Am I losing money? So we get in these sort of jams where we're torn between being accountants and being like music lovers. And some people just they quit wanting to take risks at a certain age in it because they've lost enough of their asses on things. And then some of us, so I find, you know, when you're talking about genre diversity, I just don't understand how you can love one type of music and not another. I mean, loving music is loving music. Like, it just moves you, right? So if you're in a position that you're running a business or you're programming an event space, like that sort of intrinsic value should be reflected in it, right? And that's changed in Austin just within the past 5 to 10 years, and is actually at the top of the conversation right now. So, you know, stay tuned, and if you don't see the changes you like, continue to be vocal and keep that pressure up, because it's important. It's like an ecosystem, right? We need all of it.
So I think we're at time. I know we had one more question. Can we take this last question? Well, nobody's going to stop us, so just do a
Okay,
question real
great.
quick.
Hi, how's it going? My name is Robert. I actually lead a nonprofit around uniting marginalized communities through arts entrepreneurship and trying to connect New York with Texas. Specifically trying to create a buy-in for impact investors to engage with artists that are cultivating change in their community. So my question would be just around the thought of using investing or using social impact, these new words that come from San Francisco, around social impact and how sort of naturally artists are sort of doing things for social good naturally. What the thought around using two completely different worlds of social impact investments, the large foundations, these people with a lot of money, billion-dollar market, and connecting it with another billion-dollar market known as the arts and culture sector, and how there could be potential intersections between the two.
I mean, one of the threads that and you can jump in real quick, and hopefully somebody will pull us off the stage in a second, but I think the underlying thing is that those are important arguments and people value them, but I think what Brendon's been saying, if you can't make a financial case, then it's hard to get people to take. So that's an important piece of it, but also underlying it with why this makes business sense or why this makes economic sense for the community, as well as the more the more important, you know, side that's important to us in terms of culture and all of that. And that's everything. You know, when you end up engaging with the city, you're engaging with adults, period, in your life. At some point, you have to understand what's important to them and make that valuable.
Yeah, that's well said. That's what I would have said. Yeah.
So I think they're going to rip us off. Thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. That was a great discussion.